Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam rasulullah. The Dr. Shabazz Charity Group welcomes you to this COVID-19 vaccine panel discussion. My name is Amir Malik, and I'll be moderating this discussion. The Dr. Shabazz Charity Group wanted to give a panel of respected physicians the opportunity to discuss the virus and the vaccines that have been approved with so much misunderstanding out there. The Dr. Shabazz Hussain Charity Group started its mission after the death of its namesake. Shabazz Hussain tragically passed away at the age of 21 when he was in his third year of medical school. By remembering our purpose in life and who we serve, the foundation of Dr. Shabazz Charity Group's mission is to honor and preserve the loving memory of the dreams and aspirations Shabazz wanted to pursue. He genuinely believed in the importance of taking care of others, and his passion is what inspires the mission to work towards improving the health and wellness of the community. As to the vision of the group, it provides specialized programming, relief, and aid to strengthen the health and wellness of our community through such activities as the Muslimah Sanctuary, women's groups, play groups, flu shot clinics, blood drives, and parenting classes. The charity served well over 4,000 people in 2020. Find the Dr. Shabazz Charity Group on social media and sign up for the newsletter at shabazzhusseincharities@gmail.com. All contact info is in the chat. Now I'd like to introduce the panelists and have them speak for a few minutes about their experiences during the past year. Dr. Samreen Vora, just a moment. Dr. Samreen Vora is the Medical Director of Simulation at Children's Hospital. Dr. Vora is a board-certified emergency medicine physician and did her emergency medicine residency at University of Illinois Peoria OSF St. Francis Medical Center. Dr. Vora has a master's in healthcare administration and management and a master's in health professions education. Dr. Vora has presented internationally on a variety of simulation and medical education topics. Dr. Vora's current research focuses on the role of implicit bias in simulation education. Go ahead, Dr. Vora.
Sorry, I didn't realize I hadn't unmuted. Assalamu alaikum, hello. And I'll just start by saying my experience has been a little bit limited over this last year because at the end of the year I did go on maternity leave. So I'll share a little bit before I went on my leave. And I worked both at the Children's Hospital and at an adult ER facility at Regents Hospital as well. And so I kind of had a varied experience just because the virus was very different how it came through in the pediatric world versus the adult world. And so my experiences in the adult ED were similar to probably a lot of what the other physicians on this panel may speak to, near just before I started on leave. So it was in the second half of the year where Minnesota was hit really hard. I did, work shifts in the ED where we were seeing quite a few very sick patients. And so I've had that experience. And then in the pediatric world, it actually was the second, we didn't see a lot of really sick COVID patients, at least while I was still working in the ED before my leave. But I did start seeing kind of sick kids that were coming in with the inflammatory process that happened after they had been infected with COVID or, theoretically been infected with COVID. So we did see quite a few sick kids, but I know while I've been on leave and kind of following what's happening at my hospital, things have gotten worse and they've had, a number of pediatric patients that are in the ICUs and pretty sick. And we started accepting patients that were older. And so we've been seeing, we've had a death, but in an older patient above 20, from COVID. So I've had those experiences. The bigger part of my experience, I do a lot of education. So I do a lot of simulation education. And so when the pandemic first started, we did a lot of education using simulation, meaning we helped staff in the hospital practice how they would respond and how they would keep the patient and the staff safe when they had COVID patients and that sort of thing. And either using mannequins or actors to teach our staff and plan. And then for the vaccine, we did a lot of simulating just how, so as you'll hear probably in the talk today, there's very strict guidelines on how the vaccine was developed, but also how it's distributed. So around the country, actually, simulation was used to figure out the best ways to distribute the vaccine to keep it safe. It has to be at certain temperatures. And then at our hospital, simulating how the vaccine clinic will go up, how it'll be equitably distributed amongst our staff, and then, you know, in the next wave. So I was part of some of that education and simulation as well. So that's been kind of my experience so far.
Our next panelist, a physician for 20 years, Dr. Mohammed Imtiaz Hussain, is board certified in family and emergency medicine and did his residency program at Hennepin County Medical Center. He also works as a trauma physician consultant for the Minnesota Department of Health Rural Trauma Program. Dr. Hussain cherishes the blessing of being able to help people in tough times. When they are really sick and need help, he believes in a holistic approach to care, including mind, body, and spirit. Go ahead, Dr. Hussain. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the community and the opportunity for being on the panel. Alhamdulillah, you know, God tests us in different ways, and I believe that COVID-19 is one of the ways we are being tested, not as a human being, but also as a humanity. In the emergency room, you know, we are the first line where the patients come in, and after that, they get filtered out. And the patients who are sick but can go home, and the patients who need to be in the hospital, they get admitted, and then Dr. Talha or Dr. Vora are the ones who might be able to take care of them to help them improve and potentially go home. The reason I'm here is the first part of the pandemic, when we got hit back in March and April, we were prepared and we were learning how to perform better, but we did not get hit that hard. On the second part, back in July and August and September, we got hit pretty hard. To the point that we were not able to admit patients to the hospital. The patients were staying in the emergency for too long, and a lot of other unintended consequences because of the number of patients we were seeing and how sick they were. So there is one story in particular I want to share with everyone. And this is what has changed a lot of us look at things. So I want you to listen to this story. So we had a patient who was 32-year-old, Hispanic guy, pretty hardworking, has a wife and a couple of kids. Was diagnosed with COVID-19. On Friday, he came to our emergency room. He was seen, evaluated, and it was deemed that he does not meet the criteria for admission and he can go home and quarantine himself. On Saturday, he presented to another emergency room, same thing, they evaluated him. And on both occasions, the evaluations were pretty thorough and patient was sent home. On the night of Saturday, he again came back to the emergency room, and we use a concept you might hear quite a bit is happy hypoxemic. And that is what we see in COVID patients. So his oxygen level was low, but he was able to communicate and talk. But within a matter of hours, he crashed. Interventions were done. Patient was intubated. We were lucky enough to get to him to a higher level of care where there is an ICU available. But during this process, patient has sustained enough damage to the brain that after 2 days, it was deemed that it is better to take the patient off the machine. And that was done. Now at this point, I want you to close your eyes and imagine that that person is one of us. And how will that affect our family? How will that affect our community? Once you see that, then the question of vaccine, whether I should take it or not, most of the time does not come into the mind. And I got the vaccine two weeks ago. It was Monday morning, 8 o'clock, first appointment. There were 6 people. I was one of them. And I can share you that I was very excited to get the vaccine that day, and so were the other people. Yes, there are some people who will always have concerns, and it is reasonable to have that. And it is good to have dialogue with those people and explain to them what it means not to have the vaccine. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Our final panelist and main presenter, Blaine resident Dr. Talha Khan, did his internal medicine residency at Hennepin County Medical Center and his pulmonary critical care fellowship at the University of Minnesota. In 2017, he became the chief of staff at St. Croix Regional Medical Center, where his wife is also a physician. He is on his hospital's COVID vaccination task force. Dr. Khan, tell us about some of your experiences and then begin your PowerPoint presentation. Audience members, after the presentation will be our Q&A, so enter your questions in the chat area.
Jazakallah, Brother Amir and Sister Kausar, for arranging this. My name is Talha. Basically, I can share a lot of stories because last 1 year is just interesting, to least say. The COVID-19, when it hit our hospital, it's a rural area, so it also brings a different set of challenges, how much resources we had available. We worked tirelessly to develop programs to keep patients safe, as well as continue to provide the regular medical care which most people need. In this whole scenario, we have seen that some of the COVID care was also affected. For example, people with cancer and heart attack and stroke risk and so forth, as probably Dr. Bora and Dr. Hussain have seen this too. I call it like, it's such a new disease that we were just learning, or we are still learning a lot about this disease. Think this way, that we were building an aeroplane while we're flying in it. So it's something like that this whole year had been for us and for everybody in the healthcare community. I think the biggest story that I want to share was actually one of my own patients. I'm a pulmonologist, a lung specialist, so most of my patients are high-risk patients anyhow. I have been taking care of a patient who had a very deadly lung disease, and we were able to stabilize for the last 5 to 6 years. Unfortunately, she got affected with the COVID-19 and got admitted. So as her husband, and so as her son. Imagine there was 3 family members in one hospital side by side. And she was eventually, unfortunately, dying. So we had to wheel her husband as well as her son in the room, and they stood there while she was dying, and all 3 were infected with COVID-19. And we had to discharge the husband and the son so they can go back and arrange for funeral. Imagine how sad the whole case was, and imagine how affected the whole family as well as the medical personnel was in the room. Same way, it happened multiple times that I stood, one of my patient, 40-some-year-old, I stood at her bedside for 4 hours straight and unable to revive her. Although healthy otherwise, just got infected with the COVID-19. So there's a lot of stories to share, but beside the regular stuff that I'm gonna talk about, one of the biggest way to stop this pandemic and probably go back to the normal life is to work through the vaccination. So let me share my screen. Let's see. All right, can you guys all see the presentation here?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so basically I made some PowerPoint presentation, so I can actually go through this quickly and in a more scientific manner. Most of the resources is from the CDC as well as from National Institute of the Health. So it's all evidence-based. I will go through quick, and after we are done, I will ask Brother Amira and Sister Kausar to share with the community if they want to read through it. Most of them is in the layman terminology, so people can understand it better. And of course, we're always here to answer questions. So basically, we need to learn from the history. The first epidemic in the United States was smallpox, and after that, it's a polio epidemic. Then the virus was identified, and in 50s, the case surge, and then it was a new emphasis on the widespread vaccination. And eventually, the polio vaccine came through. Most people got vaccinated, and they were able to take care of epidemic. This is the most successful story about the vaccine and the infections in the United States or in the world. There's only 2 countries in the world right now where the polio still exists. And unfortunately, both of them are Muslim countries. So I have worked with the polio immunization program back in Pakistan in 2000, and it was quite a successful program. So one of the biggest success of the medical field in the last 100 years is vaccination of any disease. So what do we know about the COVID-19? This is a virus that probably all of us know about. Most patients will have mild to moderate symptoms, but there's unfortunately a lot of death related to it so far. Every person get affected differently. Almost 30% of cases could be very mild or actually asymptomatic. So people might be spreading the infection without even knowing about it. General measures are always still very good. Wear a mask, wash your hands, 6 feet distancing, avoid close contacts, avoid touching your eyes and nose and mouth, clean and disinfect frequently. All these measures you still need to take. It doesn't mean if somebody get a vaccine that they have all the, that they can do and whatever they want to do. They still need to take the proper measures. Now, federal government was funding and coordinating developing of multiple vaccine candidates. You probably heard of Moderna and Pfizer. These are the 2 vaccination that has been approved, or I should not say approved, they're under EUA. And EUA means Emergency Use Authorization. Usually after phase 4 trial, they get approved. But these are the 2 vaccine that has been under EUA right now, and AstraZeneca, Oxford AstraZeneca, maybe in April of 2021 will get approved too. I want you guys to understand about the phases of clinical trial, and that's very important in terms of vaccine development. And that answers some of the question people have, how quick that vaccine has been developed. So there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Phase 1 is usually 20 to 100 healthy volunteer. And then basic question that they are trying to answer is this vaccine is safe? Is there any serious side effects? How does the vaccine relates to any side effect? Is there any immune response? And if that passes, then it goes to phase 2 trial, where several hundred volunteers comes through. And what are the most common short-term side effects? They're trying to find out what is the body's immune response. Is there any sign that vaccine is protective? Once the phase 2 trial has passed through, then it goes to phase 3 trial, where we go up to 1,000 plus patients. That's the biggest trial that typically happens, and that's after the phase 3, these 2 vaccination underwent EUA. The question that they are looking at the phase 3 trial, how do the disease rates compare between people who get the vaccine and those who do not? We call it randomizing or randomized controlled trial. All these participants doesn't know or don't know who's getting vaccine and who's getting placebo. And how well can the vaccine protect people from the disease. Phase 4 trial is currently ongoing on both for Moderna and Pfizer at this time. So as I mentioned, COVID-19 received FDA emergency use authorization, both Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. That has been tested in thousands of patients. I'll give you a quick clinical trial on the next slide. Both of them had showed that they are pretty safe and approximately equally effective, almost 95% effective at preventing COVID-19. So just to give you an idea about those 2 trial numbers, because people are saying that there was not enough people were enrolled. Actually, as compared to previous vaccines, the phase 3 trial, both for Pfizer and Moderna, had more patients. So for example, there is a vaccine that is developed for kids and infants. That particular vaccine had only 1,000 kids in the phase 3 trial. And if you look at here, Pfizer had 43 or close to 44,000 patients. So as Moderna has close more than 30,000 patients. And it was all over the place. So almost 30% of the patients that were enrolled were actually from minorities. As you can see the breakdown here, 20% Hispanic or 10% African American. One of the concerns the minority community has about the vaccination, which I will talk more about in the later slides. So importantly, what are the mRNA vaccine? So it needs to understand it better to understand the previous vaccines. Previous vaccines usually, we take the inactive virus or bacteria or weakened virus or bacteria, and we inject in the person's body, and then body develop immunity against it. mRNA vaccines are different. Basically, they actually teaches our cell how to make a harmless piece, what we call a spike protein, which is found on the surface of COVID-19. Now, the material from the vaccine is usually destroyed from our cells once the copies of the spike protein are made and it's no longer needed. Then those spike protein will be displayed on the cells, and that's where our body produce immunity or antibodies against. Now, it's very important to know that those mRNA does not enter the cell nucleus. And why it's important, because there is some talk about that it will change our genetic material. That's not correct. Our DNA is in the nucleus, and this mRNA is staying in the cytoplasm. So cell has two different areas. So remaining in cytoplasm, so it does not go into the nucleus, does not affect our DNA. So that's very important fact to know. Now, again, people say it's a newer technology. Tech used for this vaccine is new but not unknown. So this vaccine has been studied for influenza as well as Zika virus. If you guys remember a few years ago, in the southern part of the continent, there was an infection going on, rabies, cytomegalovirus, and more importantly, this technique has been studied and ongoing studies going on for cancer therapy or cancer targeted therapy. So it's not a newer technology, it's just been new for this particular vaccine. So side effects. Usually these mRNA vaccines are expected to produce side effect mostly after the second dose. And these are very mild. So most common side effect will be pain at the site of injection, some swelling, possibly myalgias, which means the muscle pain, head hurt, or a little bit of low-grade fever. No significant safety concerns were identified in the clinical trial. People talk about the severe allergic reaction. That happens even less than 0.00002%. So very, very rare. I have not looked at the most recent data, but a week ago, or almost 1.5 weeks ago, I think out of 272,000 patients, there was only 6 people who get the anaphylactic reaction. So let me say that again, 6 people only out of 272,000 people who get the anaphylactic or severe allergic reaction, which actually was treated within 24 hours. At least 8 weeks of safety data was gathered, and actually they extended up to the 4-month data. Usually side effects from the vaccine happens within the first 3 weeks, but just for the safety reasons, they actually extended up to 8 weeks, and now they're extended up to 4 months almost. Safety is the top priority. So COVID-19 vaccine has been held to the same safety standard as any other vaccine. Not only before authorization, FDA carefully review all the safety data from the clinical trial. And as I mentioned, they actually extended the period up to the 4-month. And the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, that was ACIP, review all the safety data before recommending the use. Now, I just want to be very clear, the ACIP is a separate nonpartisan committee. So it advises FDA, but they're not part of the FDA. If you say there are different group of doctors and pharmacists and researchers and all sort of those things that they suggest if the vaccine should go through or not. And that's a regular process for all the vaccines. And then after vaccine authorized, FDA and both CDC closely monitor vaccine safety and side effects. So for example, I got a vaccine, this COVID-19 vaccine, and I've been filling out a form every day, reporting back to CDC so they can monitor my side effects and make sure that vaccine is safe. So they are still gathering data about the vaccine safety, but so far it has been looking very good. Now, again, how was the vaccine development timeline is accelerated, but making sure it's safe. So understand this, researchers use existing clinical trials. The network has been built up already to conduct vaccine study for other viruses. So for example, HIV. So they were already talking about recruiting those healthy volunteers for some other kind of virus. And then mRNA vaccine are typically faster to produce than traditional vaccine. And I'll talk a little bit later in the next slide how, but they are usually very easier to build. And of course, FDA and CDC was prioritizing the review and authorization and recommendations for COVID-19 vaccine. Now, just to give you an example, think this way that how much technology and innovation has been done in the last 1 century. So from 1900 to 1950, there was horse and buggy, and then books to magazines and automobiles, and now we are traveling. And then in the last 15 years, you have seen introduction of internet, iPods, flip phone, Tesla came through, Amazon, so forth. And how quickly in the last 5 years, we don't have any landlines, flashlights, or calendar, or Walkman, or something like that. That has all gone within the last 10 years. So how quickly the technology and world is evolving, same as the medical field. So that's why the vaccine development has also been involved drastically in the last 10 years. Another example to understand this, enormous resource allocation. So think this way that somebody want to build a house and they only have, let's say, 40,000 to build that house, and they only have 1 or 2 workers. Imagine how long would it take for them to do so. Now imagine the same thing that who has enormous budget, but also have a very large construction crew, let's say 100 people. So they can actually build that house very quickly. The same way the prioritization of COVID-19 due to the pandemic, also all the money that is provided by the federal government, and also all sort of those things, and the enormous resources made the vaccine building easier than the other previous vaccine. Now, COVID-19 vaccination will protect you from COVID. We know that by the study, as I mentioned before, pretty large randomized control trial. The risk of severe illness and death from COVID-19 far outweighs any benefit from natural immunity. So it's very important to understand why vaccines being developed for any other disease or also for COVID-19. Now remember, as I mentioned before, vaccination is only one measure to help to stop the pandemic. We still need to practice other safety measures, as we talked about, until enough people has been immunized. I just want to touch base with some special populations. One of the biggest questions came to me about the pregnant woman. The study that was done for Moderna as well as for Pfizer was not done in pregnant patients. So far, Society of Maternal and Fetal Medicine, which is the governing body in America, this is the different from the federal government. This is a private body that of the physicians. They actually recommending that pregnant women should have been offered. They don't come up with any clear recommendations. So they do say that it depends upon the particular woman as well as the level of activity of virus in that community. So my recommendation is to have a discussion with your own provider about the COVID-19 vaccine in pregnant patients. Pediatrics, EUA for Pfizer as well as for Moderna. The study was not done in the kids. Moderna is currently running a trial. EUA has been approved for Pfizer up to 16 years, and for Moderna is above 18 years. So far, it has not been recommended for kids. Geriatric population, which means 65 and above. Now, this is very important because these are the most high-risk patients. Actually more than 20,000 patients that were involved in the study were in geriatric population or older adults. So that's very important because these are the most high-risk patients too. So it was a very well done study involving the geriatric patients. So another question, who should not receive the vaccine? So do not administer the vaccine to an individual with a known history of severe allergic reaction to any component of vaccine. So why emphasize severe? Severe means anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis means that you had to go to the emergency room, get admitted in the hospital, your blood pressure was low, your tongue swelled up. The milder side effect of vaccine is not the contraindication, which means your arm hurt, you had a little bit low-grade fever. These are not the contraindication. All of those people can get vaccine. We're talking about severe reaction where they had to go to the hospital. And as I mentioned earlier, only 6 out of almost close to 3,000 patients, only 6. So the percentage-wise is almost 0.0002 or even less than that. So these are the only patient that has been, or people who should not get the vaccine. Now, if somebody has HIV infection or immunocompromised status, so people who are on some medications that bring their immunity down, or somebody has cancer, all these patients may still receive the COVID-19 vaccination because the risk of severe COVID-19 disease in these patients are very high. So recommendation is actually to get the COVID-19 vaccination in those patients. I quickly go through some frequently asked questions that has been asked by me, it's in more, it's in the mind of people too, that why we are want to do this vaccination in on a mass scale. So for example, first question, I've touched it a little bit too, but how do we know if COVID-19 vaccine is safe? As I mentioned, it has been tested in large clinical trials. I compared it with the other previous vaccine. A lot of people have been recruited in this, and safety standards were not compromised. The FDA approval process or EUA process was not compromised. And there's different ages, race, and ethnicity people were involved. So it's important that safety data has still coming through, but so far all the data has been indicating that these vaccines are very, very safe. Now, other question, how this vaccine been tested in people like me? So for me, for example, I'm originally from Pakistan, so I'm so-called minority here. But the more people like me, actually the biggest concerns that those minorities have are African American and Native Americans, as you probably learned the history of the United States in the past few years. As I mentioned before, almost 30% of the US participants were Hispanic, African American, Asian, or Native American. So they did involve most of the minorities to make sure that it works in, that this vaccine works in those particular ethnicities too. So is it better to get natural immunity rather than immunity from vaccine? So just to remember this, and I mean natural immunity, if somebody had COVID-19, is it better to, I want to get infected, so if I get infected, I'll get immune. Is it better to get immunity that way or to get immunity through vaccine? So just remember that both disease and vaccine are new, but I can share a lot of stories as Dr. Hussain already shared one story with you. It can affect anybody, regardless of the age. We don't know if somebody get infected from COVID-19, how long the protection lasts. But we do know COVID-19 can cause severe illness regardless of the age and can cause eventually death. There's so many people have died from this. The benefit of the vaccine outweighs the risk or the minimal side effects related to it. So it's better to get immunity through vaccine. That's one reason. The another medical reason is there's certain type of diseases our body produce immunity better through vaccine. I'll give you one idea. There's a disease that is pretty common in the South Asian part. It's called tetanus. The tetanus infection can happen through a particular enzyme that bacteria secrete. And actually, most of the time, we don't develop immunity even though we get tetanus because it's not the actual protein, it's just the enzyme itself. So even though one get tetanus, they would not develop that much immunity. However, when the vaccine was developed, there was a specific type of the protein that goes into the body, stays there, and then eventually body produce antibody against it. So same way, we don't know much that natural immunity, how long would it last? We know by creating or teaching our cells how to create immunity with COVID-19 that would be better than the natural immunity itself. So will the shot hurt? Will it make me sick? What about the side effects? And as I mentioned, very rare. I received mine. I just got a little bit pain. Some people will get a little bit fever. Most common is the pain at the side of the injection, which is actually common with any vaccination. Probably low-grade fever. Usually it lasts for 24 hours, maximum up to 7 days. Headaches is also common, and usually it's common after the second dose of the vaccine. So again, how do we know these vaccines are safe when they're so new? That's actually pretty also common question. As I mentioned, it has been tested in a large clinical trial. And then what about the long-term side effects? So most commonly, these side effects happens only, as I mentioned, within the 24 hours, maximum lasting up to 7 days or up to even 3 weeks. But as I mentioned, both Moderna and Pfizer, the initial data came out up to 8 weeks and they extended up to 4 months. So we had a lot of time to look at those side effects, and all of them so far are pretty rare or mild. So how many doses needed? There are 2 doses. First shot primes the immune system. Think this way, it's like painting a wall. You have to do 2 coats to get the better results. So because you're mRNA vaccination, typically you need 2 doses, same as like tetanus or diphtheria. These are the another infections that required multiple doses. For COVID-19, it required 2 doses. Prime the immune system with the first dose, and then second shot will strengthen the immune system. Why should I get the vaccine if I still need to mask? We know that COVID-19 protects you. As I said, it's 95% effective. We know it will protect you from contracting the COVID-19, but we don't know if vaccine will prevent you from spreading the COVID-19 if you have been exposed. So you may carry it and give it to somebody else, although you are protected after you get the vaccine. So hopefully, if enough people get it, enough people get the COVID-19 vaccination, we might not need to do the mask, but you still need to do the mask after you get the vaccine. So why do I need a COVID-19 vaccine if I already have COVID? And as I mentioned before, the CDC says more research is required, but we don't know if somebody get the COVID-19 infection, how long the immunity will last. So CDC recommend to still do the immunization period. The most they are recommending is still have to wait for 90 days if somebody had a COVID-19 infection to get the vaccine. But we're still recommending to get everybody the vaccine, even if they had COVID-19 infection before. Now, these are the 2 things that I really want to touch. There's a lot of questions out there. people think that COVID-19 vaccine was made from aborted fetal tissue. Is that true? And that's not true at all. The composition of vaccine includes an mRNA that teaches our cells to make those spike protein. Then there's a lipid molecule or cholesterol molecule that carries that mRNA to the cells. There's potassium in it. There's a salt water, and there is sugar in it. And that's pretty much it. There's only 5 things that present in the COVID-19 vaccine that also alleviate, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, that might alleviate some of the people have concern if that COVID-19 or any vaccine cause autism or not. So it does not have aluminum, it does not have mercury, it does not have anything like that, because they don't need those preservative because of the different technology. So can COVID-19 give me, COVID-19 vaccine can give me COVID-19 infection? No. As I mentioned previously, usually we use dead bacteria or virus to produce immunity. These are our mRNA or mRNA vaccine. So they would not even care. They actually don't even have the COVID-19 infection or a COVID-19 virus in the vaccine itself. So it's very important to get your latest information about COVID-19 from the reliable source. There are, as you can see on the social media or WhatsApp group, there is a lot of information that has been handed around without looking at the background. It's important for actually each individual to go on those websites that has been mentioned on this slide to get information by themselves. These are all CDC and FDA websites are specifically made for laymen or people who can understand it. There's not many medical terminologies out there. There's actually even references there about these studies and research. So if somebody is interested in it, go and read the paper by themselves so understand it better. But it's important to get your information from the reliable sources. Your physician is very important. The physician that you trust, your primary care physician, your ER physician, your pulmonologist, your cardiologist, anybody that you trust, but it has to be your physician to get more information. Local health department, Minnesota Department of Health has a lot of information available. And I live in Anoka County, that also, their website have information about that too. And if you work in a healthcare facility or even in any private, let's say IT company or Cargill or something like that, there's actually immunization coordinator in your HR that could also provide you a lot of information in that regard. So I'll stop here and we'll take questions. And so we're back to you, Brother Amir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Talha. Those of you who have questions, please put them into the chat. I did have a few for the panelists, and it's up to the 3 of you who answer them. One of them is, can you compare the efficacy of the COVID vaccine versus the flu vaccine? And also compare the 2 viruses, because sometimes they're being used like interchangeably. Oh, they're both the flu. And so if you could talk about some of the differences between the 2 and some of the differences between the efficacy of the 2 vaccines, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Dr. Talha, do you want to take it or you want me to?
Brother Imtiaz, go ahead.
Go ahead. So I think Brother Amir, it's an excellent question because it's a good comparison. And people are also questioning why we don't have a higher rate of influenza during this winter season. So when you're talking about effectiveness of flu vaccine, it changes because flu vaccine is designed for that particular season. So I was looking at the data, and in 2004, it was only 10% effective, and in 2019, it was 45% effective. So the effectiveness of the flu vaccine varies anywhere from 10 to 45% to 56%. The second thing to remember is in the patients who are vaccinated with flu vaccine, 10% still get symptoms. And who are unvaccinated, the percentage is a little bit higher, it's about 16 to 20%. Having said that, we don't have similar data on COVID vaccine because this is the first year. But the most important thing is this. In 2019, there were 35 million cases of influenza. And influenza is not a reportable illness. It is something that they come with the data based on what they find. So there are different sources for it. So in 2019, there were 35 million cases. And out of that, there were 34,000 deaths. Compare it with COVID. So in COVID, so far as of today, we have almost 20 million cases and we have about 380,000 deaths. So that speaks volume. Now, let's say 10 years from now, COVID may look like influenza, but at this time it doesn't. So which again goes back to the fact that vaccination is very important. Did I answer your question, Brother Amir?
Yes, thank you so much. And I have another one.
Yeah.
For people who, now as first doses are starting to become available for certain groups, if someone is wondering, would it be safer to delay my second dose? Like they feel they might be on the safe side instead of, take it the second dose like a few months later. Could you speak about that issue?
Dr. Talha, you want to take this?
I can start maybe, and
Okay.
then Dr. Khan, if you want to jump in. I was only because I literally was just reading about this, and there's a little bit of a talk about it on Twitter. It's actually really important to get both doses. So the way the immune system works is that first dose, your body, it goes in your body and your body gets a little familiar with it, and then you need that second dose to actually then build up those antibodies, so your body can fight it off and build up all of those antibodies. And if you actually delay it, the virologists are talking about there's potential that because viruses mutate. So similar to when you were talking about the flu virus, it's different. It's not that it's mutating. They're different kinds of flu viruses. So that's why there's different efficacy each season. They try to figure out, okay, which of those viruses is the most likely to hit this year, and they develop the vaccine from that that particular strain of the virus. For this coronavirus, there's a risk of it mutating, right? So it goes and it is infecting tons of people, and it's getting to know all these different bodies, and then it can change a little bit, which is what we're seeing right now. There's a strain of it that's even more infectious that's was in Europe and has been found in the US too. So it's really important that if you get that first dose, that you go back and get that second dose within the time frame that they specify. And so I think for the Pfizer it's 21 days, and for Moderna it's 25 days or 24. It's just within a few days of that. So that would be, I think, really important to keep that in mind, to not break it up and think, oh, well, I've gotten the first vaccine. And also remember, the full immunity, to get that immunity, you have to get that second vaccine, or second part of the vaccine. Go ahead, Dr. Khan.
No, you put it correctly. I again go back to the regular example. You're just painting a wall, you're priming your wall. You don't come back like 3 months later to prime it again. You just do it within 24 hours. And for Pfizer, it's 21 days. For Moderna, it's 28 days. It's just like you hitting something. You don't hit one shot and then come and then just go someplace else and say there. You have to hit it consistently. So there's a particular timing that has been developed. So it has to take in it. You can't miss the second dose unless you have a very severe allergic reaction to the first one.
So I agree with both of them, and I just want to chime in. And it is a well-known fact that once you get COVID once, can you get it again? The answer is yes. What does that tell us? It tells us that the immunity wanes over a period of time. And the studies that they did on the vaccines, they have studied this fact. So one funny way of looking at it is, do you want to get COVID twice? So if not, then get the vaccine twice.
Thank you for that. Another question, people are asking, first of all, the vaccine that's gotten the most attention because it came out first was one now being distributed by Pfizer. And, people have been asking, one, who actually created that vaccine? Because there's just, a lot of things being said. And two, is there any specific reason why they ended up being able to create an effective vaccine first?
I think Sister Samreen, you might be the better person to answer that.
So in terms of creating the vaccine, I don't know that I know a specific answer in terms of who created it, but I think, just as we spoke before about, as you really well spoke in your presentation, Dr. Khan, about how the trials happen. Sorry, what was the second part of the question? So you said who created it, and then?
It was about if there was a specific reasoning why they were first.
Oh, approved first. Not that I know of. I think it was more about the speed, right? And so trying to get a vaccine out as soon as possible that had enough data to support that it was safe. And so I think there were tons of, and another reason that these vaccines were created so quickly was not because they didn't pay attention to safety, but there were so many different groups of people working at the same time. And that's why these vaccines are really similar too, because the technology that we talked about, the mRNA technology, they've done a lot more research. And so the labs that were working on it had a lot of experience, like Dr. Khan mentioned, in working with other diseases in other areas like HIV and things they've been working on for a while. And so we're able to use that knowledge. So the scientists that helped to create it, working in these labs, had a lot of this background and experience to be able to do it. And as far as I know, and I haven't read a ton about this particular question, so correct me if either of you guys know differently, but as far as I know, it really was about who had all the data together and came in front of the FDA to get this emergency approval to get rolling. They were already, and like you said, Dr. Khan, they were already starting to produce it because they had already seen with the numbers that they had and the data they had, they already knew the safety was in place and it was ready to go. So that's as far as I know. I don't know that I can specifically say which one was approved first. And they were approved within very close to each other, the Moderna and the Pfizer, very within days or a week or something. So sorry, I'm an ER physician, so details, usually it's the big picture that matters. Like, I know this is good and I can make big decisions. I forget the details sometimes. So Dr. Khan, if you want to chime in.
Yeah, so actually the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was we were expecting that will come through quicker. But what happened, as you rightly put, Sister Samreen, that the safety data came from Pfizer first, so that's why they went with the Pfizer first. And that's pretty much it. There's nothing with that, nothing more or nothing less than that. It could be Moderna, it could be Pfizer, it could be anybody else. It's just about the safety itself. So just for you to know, as mentioned before too, that they actually extended the safety data. Typically they take they usually take 8 weeks of the safety data, but they actually extended longer than that just to be safe. So that was very important to understand.
Finally, was there anything else you wanted to add about people who are concerned about autism and vaccines?
Yeah, so that has been talked a lot about in the past about the any vaccine. So if people remember the initial study published in Lancet in 1991, if I remember correctly, I think his name was Dr. Wakefield. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon in England, that it can cause autism, but that has been debunked so many times. The data was so manipulated that this particular physician's license was actually canceled. He doesn't practice that anymore, and that Lancet eventually withdrew his paper altogether. But unfortunately, the damage was done. It was already out there. So a lot of people just took that and ran away. If I don't remember correctly how many studies, but there's more than 8 to 10 studies has been done, very well done studies that has shown that it does not cause, any kind of vaccine does not cause autism. And for that particular things, we do have long-term data. Now, in terms of particularly for COVID-19, as I mentioned about the composition of vaccination, it does not even have that aluminum or mercury or some kind of heavy metals that people were concerned about that causes autism. As I mentioned, it has only mRNA molecule, uh, a cholesterol molecule that carry that mRNA, potassium, sugar, and salt. So it does not even have the COVID-19 virus itself. It does not have the aluminum or any heavy metals that can cause the autism. So even though in the past, we know all these studies have shown that it does not cause that. So we have to we know that COVID-19 vaccine would not cause the autism too. The other concern that I think, Brother Ami, you've touched before, or I touched before, about the fetal tissue, it's not been produced with the fetal tissue, and it does not carry the gelatin. That probably is not a bigger concern in America, but as progressive as Malaysia and other Muslim countries, that was a very big concern, that it carries the gelatin that comes from the haram sources, but that also actually not correct. Oxford, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, as well as Moderna, has released statement saying it does not have gelatin in it.
No, thank you so much. Before we end, I don't see any more questions here. Did any of you have any final thoughts or things that you thought we need to cover?
Brother Amir, thank you for the opportunity. And there is just one statement I would like to make. As Muslims, we live our faith. Our faith is not something we practice at home or in our massages. We live our life. We don't check out our faith when we go to work or how we interact with others. So there is a hadith quoted in Bukhari, and it says that no illness has Allah sent down except that he has also sent its cure except death. So seek out cure. So I think it's very important for us as Muslims and being a part of the community to do our part in getting rid of this COVID-19. And as more of us get immunized, there is a less likelihood of us passing it on to others. There is less likelihood of death and mortality in our community, so that the families can function, the kids can function, and people can move on. So that's my final thought.
Okay, if there are no more questions, this brings the end to the Q&A and to this session. We'll end with a dua. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and that ends our session. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Jazakallah.